Thanks, Bruno. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here. I'm going to be talking to you about designing teamwork. So I'm going to be providing some information about what I mean by designing teamwork and also give you some principles and a framework so that you might be able to start the process with your own team. But first, I'd like to start off with a question. How do you do your best work? And I'd like you to think about this question throughout the whole talk, because really understanding how you do your best work and then having that conversation with your team is how you enable your team to do their best work as well. And we'll be coming back to that a little bit later. A quick introduction to myself. As Bruno said, I am the founder of a company called Bracket, which is a consultancy based in London, and I focus on team culture and collaboration. So I do everything that's needed to help teams work better together through workshop facilitation, team coaching, consultancy, training, and I've also written this book, A Pocket Guide to Effective Workshops. In fact, I was doing a workshop earlier this week on running effective workshops. And it's interesting to me because I didn't start running workshops because I wanted to run workshops. Actually, the focus was always around team collaboration. And I fell upon workshops as a great format to encourage the environment and the atmosphere that I wanted to create for a team to work well together, particularly when those people hadn't known each other and also were coming from different disciplines. So a lot of what I'm going to be covering today really comes from what I've seen and the influences that I've experienced when I've been facilitating great workshops and even been part of great workshops, and how those principles can also be transferred towards a team as well. Well, teamwork is changing. I don't think I need to tell you that actually teamwork today looks very different to what it did a couple of months ago. And we've all been forced to work very suddenly in a new way. But actually teamwork has been changing and evolving for quite a while. We've been moving from very static kind of solid structures slowly into more kind of fluid, dynamic structures, particularly in the kind of work that we do around creativity and innovation. And that's simply because the world is changing much faster, and the challenges that we need to address, the problems that we need to solve together, need to be done collaboratively, and that's changing quite quickly. So we're using words like fluid, dynamic, elastic, distributed, remote, which all kind of indicate that we are moving in and out of teams more frequently. Teams are changing their shapes in a much more frequent manner. What teams look like is, teams today, these dynamic teams, is that, as I said, they're multidisciplinary. So every individual, mainly in a team, has their own set of skills, expertise, background, like you will have your own technical expertise. And what that means is that when you bring those people together into a team, then that team's going to create its own culture as well because of the individuals in it. And when you put the team together on a project, then the nature of that project, the problem that they need to solve and the challenges they need to kind of work through together also has an impact on the dynamic of a team. And when you look at this together, if you take an individual out, if an individual leaves or an individual joins, then that has an impact on the dynamic of the team as well. Even if the same team, they stay intact, but they start working on a new project together or the project changes, then that's going to change the dynamic of the team as well. And as we've seen more recently, when you think about the environment around the team or the context that a team works within, if that changes, then that also has a massive impact on the team and the team dynamic. Furthermore, not only are the teams that we're working in changing more frequently, are they more fluid? Most of us are actually working across more than one team. The Centre for Creative Leadership found this statistic that actually 95% of us are working across multiple teams, more than one team at the same time. So what this indicates is that teamwork is such a massive way of the way that we get work done. It's such a big factor in our working environment that it's not something that we can really leave to chance. We have to think about quite proactively and intentionally how we work better together, because it's not something that we can ignore, and it's not something that we should really leave to develop organically if it's such a big part of us being successful in our work. Historically, team building and teamwork may have been seen as two separate things. So team building, you might think of the, one day away day or the fun activity that you do once a year with your team. And the teamwork is the stuff that we get done on a day-to-day basis. Not to say that those one-off activities aren't important, but what I'd like to say is that actually teamwork and team building, they need to come a bit closer together. And I'd like to argue that in fact they should be one and the same thing, because teams are such a big way that we get work done. Actually, we can't afford to just leave our team building to a one-day event. We need to make sure that we are actively, consistently and proactively looking at the way that we work on a daily basis. It needs to be integrated into our work rather than left to chance. So I want to talk through some principles before I talk about a framework, sort of some practical steps for how to get there. And because it really does take a little bit of a shift in mindset of the way that we see our teams. Again, sometimes we might have thought that you put great people together and it just happens. Well, now we need to be a bit more intentional about how we work together. And the first step to that is having a growth mindset. And what that means is that we believe that it's possible to get better at working together. We believe that it's possible to improve our collaboration techniques through practice, through persistence, through experimentation, through learning from our mistakes. And if you want to look more into what a growth mindset is, then I'd definitely recommend Carol Dweck's book, who's a psychologist who came up with the concept. The alternative to a growth mindset, she found, is a fixed mindset, which is where people believe that talent is innate and you're either good at something or you're not. And no matter how much you try to improve, you can't get better at it. So we don't want to take that mindset into our teams. We want to have a growth mindset where we're constantly improving and looking at how we can improve. And most of all, believe that it's possible to get better at how we work together. The second principle is really sort of the crux of this talk, which is taking a design approach to our teamwork. And I mean that really literally, in being intentional in the way that we work, looking at the user experience that our team has, thinking about all of the same skills, tools, and processes, models that we use to develop great experiences for our users and our clients, and actually turning them inside internally on our team to create better experiences for the way that we work together. So taking a lot of the principles of design thinking, like empathy, understanding ourselves, how we work, and sort of having empathy for our teammates in how they work. Curiosity, what would it look like to work better together? What would better collaboration look like? What would a great meeting look like? And being creative about how we develop ideas for new ways of working together, experimenting and not being afraid to fail, and then also constantly improving. So knowing that these changes should be done in kind of small steps, and we're constantly coming back and reviewing and iterating on what we learn. The third principle is around facilitation. This is, of course, sort of one of my massive influences. And I mean facilitation on a couple of levels, not just facilitation in the workshops that we do, although that is hugely important, but how facilitation can be spread out into the principles of the way that we work. So, what happens in a well-facilitated workshop around sort of being curious, asking questions, and being able to bring people together to work in the same direction, helping them to make progress. Those are principles that we don't necessarily need to just leave in a one-day workshop, although they work there, but they can be useful in our daily work with our teams anyway. And the final principle is around behaviour change and understanding how we as humans actually do shift our behaviour into new ways of working, because this is a process of continuous improvement. A really lovely story, actually. I spoke to someone just yesterday who works in a large logistical company, and actually the company is about 35 years old, he was saying, and he's part of a new team that is there to try and encourage more of a user experience mindset in the company and using design thinking techniques to make that happen. He was actually getting quite frustrated that things weren't changing and things weren't happening. And I sort of asked him the question, well, how long have you been working on this? And he said, well, since last August, sort of 8 months. To change a 35-year-old company in 8 months is kind of quite a big expectation. So to understand that these changes happen in kind of small steps and on a basic level, on a day-to-day basis, they may be imperceptible. But when we look at the change over time, we see how far we've shifted and how far we've come. The other thing is making it natural and easy and part of our work to talk about how we work together. There's so much research out there that shows that how a team works together has much more of an impact on the success of the team than who is in it and what they're working on. Again, sometimes we have this idea that if we get brilliant people working together, then the teamwork will just fall into place. But actually it's the other way around. It's not to say that who's in the team and what they're working on isn't important. It's just that how they work together has much more of an impact on that than those two aspects. And there's so much research out there that proves this. You can go to the MIT labs, you can find stuff on Harvard Business Review. Lots of social psychologists have spent time looking into team dynamics. But there's one piece of research that I want to point you into particular, which you may have heard of, Google's Project Aristotle. A few years ago, Google were very fascinated into finding out what made their high-performing teams, and they decided to do an internal research project which explored and would identify the elements that made up their most high-performing teams so they could start to replicate that across the organisation. They had a hypothesis that it would be down to things like the IQ of the team members, where those people went to college, their qualifications, their past experience, their technical expertise. And what they found surprised them, because actually what they found were 5 factors that had nothing to do with any of that. It was these. Individuals within the team could see that their work was having an impact. They could see that there was a bigger purpose to what they were doing. And they could also see that their individual work had meaning. They could understand why they were doing what they were doing. There was structure and clarity around the tasks, around the communication, around the team, and who was doing what. And they also felt that they could depend on their team members as well, their teammates as well. But right at the top of the list was this idea of psychological safety. And what psychological safety means is that team members felt comfortable and felt comfortable to be and were able to be vulnerable in front of their teammates. They're able to make mistakes. They're able to fail. They're able to suggest silly ideas without fearing that they would be blamed or made to look stupid. And you can see how this idea of psychological safety has a massive impact in how we innovate, because those teams that are experimenting and aren't afraid to fail and are constantly coming up with the ideas are the ones that are more likely to go on to be innovative. So psychological safety can happen naturally within teams, but actually if it's not there, then what can we create and what can we design to make the environment safe for people to speak up and have that psychological safety? So I'm just going to go through some elements of framework, almost like it's not really a step to step, but it's the elements to kind of have in place when you're thinking about designing teamwork. The first 2 are very much about the context, looking at the bigger picture and looking at the individuals within the team. And the second 2, designing new ways of working, which is a process, this kind of intentional process of looking at, what the team is working on, who is in the team, and then designing the ways that will match both of those things. And then where I think we can have a big impact in a short space of time is how we meet in our meetings, because that's where a lot of collaboration takes place. Now, looking at the bigger picture, actually, this relates a lot to what Majid was talking about in his talk just now. It's kind of taking a step back and really being sure that everybody in the team can see the direction that they're going in and they all align in that direction. This is not just important in terms of kind of coordination, but really important for the motivation of the individuals in the team. This is identified by Daniel Pink in his book Drive, and he was looking in his book Drive, he talks all about motivation for people in the knowledge economy, the knowledge sector, which are people like us that kind of spend our time developing ideas and using our thoughts to develop our work. And he identifies 3 areas: autonomy, which is the ability to do your work in the way that works well for you and having control over that; mastery, which is the idea of being challenged, not too much and not too little, but enough to feel that you're making progress and you're developing your skills. And the final one is purpose. And he describes purpose as the deep motivation and engagement that people have when they feel they're working towards something much bigger than themselves. And it's really important to have these conversations with your team, as I say, not just for the alignment, but for the engagement of everybody on the team. Going back to Google's Project Aristotle, the idea of this kind of meaning of the work and the impact of the work, people need to see that what they're doing fits into kind of an overall purpose. So this goes back to kind of thinking strategically as a team. Like, how often do you get to think strategically as a team? Often we're so focused on kind of our individual work that, you know, we want to get our stuff done, and we don't really take a step back to see how all the pieces fit together. Again, sort of very aligned with what Majid was saying, you know, think of us individually as the pieces of the puzzle. And when we talk about alignment and our purpose, that's almost like the strategic narrative of our team that Majid was referring to. So take those times to take a step back, look at the bigger picture of the team. Where are we going? What do we want to achieve? Are we all moving in the right direction? Does the work that we're doing individually piece together? Are there any gaps? Are we all kind of working in the same way and working towards the same thing? Looking at individual ways of working, it kind of comes back to the question that I asked you at the beginning about how you do your best work. How well do you know your own working style? This self-awareness is absolutely key. As I said, you know, if you want to get a team working well together, then it starts with the individuals knowing how they work best. So it takes some reflection. Luckily, you know, it's an unfortunate in a situation that we're in right now, but what it has given us is the opportunity to reflect on when we're most productive, what kind of gets in our way of doing our best work. And we can't ignore the environment that we're in right now when we're working from home and all the distractions that we have. So we've really had to kind of put a laser focus on when we're able to get our work done. A really great process for doing this, which I recommend most teams, to most of the teams that I work with, is the idea of a team user manual. And this actually came from a technology product leader who created a manual of himself that he would give to his team every time he joined a new team or someone joined his team, so that he understood a bit about how he worked. And you're going to ask yourself some questions, and you can do this, you know, you can note down these questions and perhaps you can do it later, but it really helps you to give an insight into how you thrive in your working environment. You know, within the situation that we're in right now, think about what is your current situation and where are you working? Who do you have around you? What other commitments do you have? And what's getting in the way of doing your work? And what do you find challenging about right now? And as I say, these can be questions that you ask yourselves, even if we're not in a situation like we are right now. But what do you find challenging? What gets in the way of you being able to get work? And what do you find challenging within your work, actually? What kind of work do you thrive on? Like, when do you really get into your flow? When is it that you kind of really enjoy, you're really engaged and you're really motivated by your work? Because that's the kind of work that you want to do more of. And you want to let your team know that as well. And when are you most creative and productive? Have you developed a routine? Are you an early bird? Are you a night owl? Do you need to kind of have a break in between meetings, or do you need to take a break in the afternoon? Do you need to kind of go out on a walk to recharge and then come back, and that's where you get your best ideas? So really reflecting on these elements will start to give you insight into how and when you do your best work. And the next step will be then to take that into a conversation that you have with your team and share that. Everybody shares that information, and then you're going to start creating ways of working around that, rather than each individual trying to battle against each other because you have conflicting ways of working. So once you have that information, you know, what is it that we're working towards? Who do we have on the team, and how does everyone like to work? This is when you're ready to start designing new ways of working, because that's what you're going to design around. And you want to think in terms of routines and rituals. What are the things that you can do on a repeated basis, on a regular basis, that reinforce collaboration and teamwork within your team? And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples for what I mean by that, so that you get an idea. So Asana is the productivity tool technology company, and you know, obviously they're quite big into team productivity and enabling people to get their best work done and helping to create the environments for teams to thrive. And what they realised was that their days were just getting blocked out by meetings, and nobody in the team was able to spend the time doing the deep work where they were able to really focus and concentrate on a task, so that they were able to develop their own work. So they had a company-wide conversation, and what they came up with as an idea, because of the context that they were working with, within was this idea of no meeting Wednesdays, where on a Wednesday, it wasn't mandated, but it was recommended that no internal meetings were held within the company so that everybody could just focus and get on with their work and they weren't going to be interrupted by these meetings. Another example, which I really love actually, which is Buffer. And Buffer have got a lot of experience. You know, they're a fully distributed team anyway. They're a social media technology company. They create a tool for publishing posts. And they're fully distributed, as I said, so they've got a lot of experience in working remotely. And they found something similar. They found that Slack was kind of getting in the way. It was meant to facilitate their work and collaboration, but actually people were finding all of the messages quite overwhelming. So they decided to sit down and develop their own 10 agreements for how they would use Slack within the company. And the reason I love this example is because it shows that, you know, this technology, these are just tools. You know, we shouldn't let ourselves be led by the technology. We have got the power and the control over creating how we want to use those tools to support our teamwork within our own environment. Another example, not attributed to any company, but I really love this example. In Sweden, they have a tradition called fika, which roughly translates to coffee and pastries. And every day, companies that do use this routine or ritual will stop their work at either 10 in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'll stop and have coffee together. And it's kind of almost unwritten rule that you're not allowed to talk about work, you're only allowed to talk about social things. So it starts to help the team to connect and to get to know each other. And one of the things that I've seen actually with some of the teams that I've been working with over this period is that they have been scheduling in kind of coffee breaks, virtual coffee breaks, where there's no agenda, there's no need to talk about work. It's really just checking in on their team members to making sure that they're okay. So another example of something that's been designed specifically for the context and for the team and what the team need. And the thing about all of this is, first of all, those are great examples. I'd recommend that you don't copy them, that you do kind of take inspiration from them, but you actually look at your own environment and think, right, okay, what do we need to create based on who is in the team, what we're working on, what our vision, what our purpose is, and the environment that we're all working around. And what that means is that you'll start to develop your own team habits that need to be reviewed on a regular basis. This isn't something that you do once and then that's it. You know, that's how you work forever. Because our teams are changing and because the environment around us is changing so frequently as well, we need to be in this habit of continuous improvement, looking at the habits that we have, which are unconscious, either unconscious or conscious, and looking at how we might need to improve or iterate them. And also having this experimental mindset as well, testing things, not thinking that once we design something and we try it out, that that's the way that it has to be. We're kind of taking this idea that, look, you know, we're creating a prototype, if you like, for how we might work. We're testing it, we're coming back to it and we're reviewing it. And if it doesn't work or we need to tweak it, we're iterating it. And then we're going through that process and on a continuous basis. So it relates back to what I was saying about having these regular conversations about how you work together, making it a natural part of what you do, in the same way that you talk about what you're doing and the project that you're working on and the tasks that you need to get done. In the same conversations we should be having about how we work together as well. So think about, you know, what it is that you'd like to improve in the way that your team works together, and start having that conversation. What could it look like? You know, what would it look like if we were to collaborate, we were able to collaborate more effectively? What would it look like if we had more psychological safety? What would it look like if we were communicating more seamlessly? And start to be creative about how you can develop new ways of working around that. So the final piece is around how you meet. And the reason I've kind of given this its own section is because I do believe that meetings are either a reflection of our culture. You can often see sort of how a team works together just by observing their meetings, or they can be a way to shape our culture as well if we take a design perspective and we're intentional about how we meet. And obviously, you know, I'm a bit biased, but I'd love to ask this question, you know, how can you make your meetings more like workshops? And that's not to say that all of our meetings have to be like workshops. It's not always appropriate, but I do believe that there's a lot of principles that we achieve, lots of things that we achieve in great workshops that we can take influence from to make our meetings better. I mean, I'm sure that many of you would agree that, you know, your diary is overrun with meetings, especially now. We really feel the pressure of all of the Zoom meetings that we've been in and how tiring they can be. And we've got an opportunity to make them better and to design them. So this is what great workshops look like. You know, great workshops are collaborative and they encourage creativity. Everyone gets involved, they're able to participate with great facilitation. You make progress, they're productive. You get from point A to point B and you come up with outcomes. You can also create clarity within a team as well. It has those conversations which uncover those assumptions and ask those questions that need to be asked. And the other thing as well is a thing about a great workshop is that it can really be an environment that motivates the team, gets them excited about a project and the way that they're working together. And when I look at all of those elements, actually, those are things that we want in our teams anyway. They shouldn't just be reserved to workshops. So what is it that we can take from workshops into the way that we work to make our teamwork more effective? First thing, I mean, when I talk about designing workshops or making workshops more effectively, two of the elements that I always talk about really being specific around is being clear on what the purpose of that workshop is, because based on the purpose of the workshop, it's going to decide what format that workshop is going to take. You know, it may be a 1 hour brainstorming session. It may be a half-day co-creation session. It may be a multi-day strategic session. Every kind of workshop that we run is going to have a specific purpose, and they're based on that. It's going to have a different format. But it's the same thing for our meetings. An update meeting, check-in meeting is very different to a deeper discussion that we need to have around a problem that we need to solve. So once you start to identify the different purposes and the formats that you have within your meeting, what you'll find is that there's different meetings that need to take place at different times throughout a project or within your working engagement with a team. And it starts to develop a rhythm as to how you work together. That's how you kind of stay connected and communicated with your team, and creates the expectations of, you know, what your team is going to discuss, and keeps you coming back and kind of, you know, connected through that line of, you know, focus and productivity. Some of the sort of very tangible devices and techniques that we can take from workshops to inject into our meetings are things like a check-in. You know, I start most of my workshops with a check-in, a question that everyone can answer in turn. And this has many effects and many positive effects. It could be that it's just a way of getting people into the mindset or the mind space of the meeting that they're going to have. Getting people to speak up at the start of a meeting makes it more likely that they're going to speak up later on in the meeting as well. And there's been some teams that have reported that just by doing a simple check-in at the start of a meeting repeatedly helps to build that psychological safety that we spoke about earlier that's so important to high-performing teams. Another thing is time to think individually. We have got lots of different personality types within our teams, and some of those people feel much more comfortable speaking up in front of others, whereas others like to have a little bit of time to think before they speak up. And it can come across or, you know, be perceived in meetings sometimes as dominating behaviour or people that aren't participating or getting engaged, when actually sometimes all people need is just a little bit of time to think individually before they launch into a group brainstorm. And it can feel uncomfortable to have this individual time, but it can be really valuable for those people that just need that time to catch up. So before you ask your team a question and you want to do a bit of brainstorming around a challenge that you have, just give people a little bit of time to think individually before you launch into that group discussion. The other thing is to separate out divergent and convergent thinking. These two types of thinking interfere with each other, and this is where meetings often go round and round in circles. And divergent thinking is when you're in brainstorming mode, and it's just about generating as many ideas as possible. There's no restriction, there's no stupid ideas at this stage. You just want to get everything out on the table and build on sort of ideas. Convergent thinking is when you need to kind of whittle down those ideas and perhaps select a few that you're going to move forward with. It's almost like you're applying criteria to the ideas so you can come up with the best ones or the ones to choose to work on. And as I said, those two types of thinking interfere with each other. Bringing convergent thinking into a divergent thinking stage, you shut down ideas too early. if you're at the end of a meeting and you need to make a decision, and someone's still coming up with new ideas, and that can also be frustrating. So in your meetings, you can kind of, be specific and say, right, okay, now I just want ideas for this problem that we're solving. Okay, let's vote on them. Let's move into convergent thinking mode. Let's vote on them. But separating out those two types of thinking can really contribute to having better, productive conversations. The other thing about workshops is that they're dynamic. We use post-it notes, we kind of make things. When we're in a physical space together, then we use the walls, or when we're in a digital space, then we might use tools like Mural. Again, there's no reason why you can't bring that into a meeting, and you can make use of visual tools to illustrate what you're talking about and help people to sort their ideas. And there's research to show that when people are engaged in that kind of activity, it actually does make meetings much more productive and much more engaging. And then the final tip, which I'm obviously going to advocate for a lot, is to have a facilitator, because a facilitator has a very specific role in group discussions, which is to stay objective and to keep an eye on group dynamics, which may get in the way of a team working well together. So having someone that kind of takes a step back and is overlooking how the team are interacting with each other, if someone's dominating, if someone's not getting engaged, making sure that the outcomes of the meeting that you planned for are actually, you're on the way to achieving them, is a really good way to make your meetings better. And that's a task that can be rotated around a team as well. It doesn't have to be with one person. And this all kind of contributes into what I call a workshop culture. This is kind of the focus of my work at the moment, and perhaps the topic of my next book. But what I call a workshop culture is not just a team that runs lots of workshops, but a team where the elements and those principles of workshops, as I said, collaboration, creativity, inclusion, motivation, engagement, you find them in between those formal sessions as well. So it's almost like there's no difference really between a kind of formal workshop and the way that the team works together anyway. There's more psychological safety. Teams are more experimental. They are able to kind of come up with ideas and challenge each other productively. So how can you build a workshop culture? How can you take principles from workshops intentionally and inject them into your meetings to improve the way that you work together? So just a quick summary of everything that I've covered today. This idea of designing teamwork, it's about being intentional about how you work together and being creative in designing new ways of working that suit the context that your team works within, the individuals in the team, and the purpose of the team. And in order to do that, you need to have a growth mindset. You need to be in the stage of this idea, this mindset of continuous improvement. And then it's okay to fail, and it's okay to experiment, and it's okay to challenge ourselves as well. Have regular conversations about how you work together, and in fact, make it natural to talk about how you work together. It's not a thing anymore, it's just something that you do. And your team are very comfortable in talking about the processes and how you create the environments for everyone to do their best work. And you're bringing that self-awareness, that empathy, that curiosity into the conversations that you have. Using design thinking to create and improve habits, routines and rituals. So applying that empathy, applying that experimentation, the iteration, and doing that on a continuous basis, not just doing it once and thinking that's it, but coming back to it, particularly when a dynamic within the team changes. Improving the way you meet, opportunity there to make a massive impact in how we work together. So yeah, my final question to you is, what will you do to help your team work better together? How can you start designing your teamwork? How can you start facilitating the conversations within your team to talk about how you work together? Thank you very much.